Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step into the strange, sweet, punishing dark of a sugar plantation in 1835, where the air smells of cane juice, ash, mud, and smoke long before the sun even thinks of rising. You're not visiting the grand house with its polished silver and shaded veranda. You're waking where the work begins, where women rise in the black hour before dawn, where the fields whisper in the wind, and where the boiling house glows like a furnace against the night. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, tell me your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and you open your eyes into heat that never really left the room. The hut is close and still. The darkness feels thick enough to touch. A child breathes softly nearby. Someone turns in sleep. The smell of packed earth, damp wood, old smoke, and sweat hangs low under the roof. You lie on a rough pallet stuffed with dry plant fibres that scratch through thin cloth and press against your hips and shoulders. Rest is never quite rest here. It is more like a pause granted by exhaustion. Outside, the night insects hum in a steady veil. Farther off, you hear frogs in wet ground and a murmur of wind combing through tall cane. Then comes the sound that rules every body on the estate, a bell, not musical, not kind, a hard iron note in the dark. It cuts through the huts and yards with perfect confidence, because it does not need to ask whether you're ready. You rise quickly, because sugar plantations run on strict time. The cane must be cut when it is ripe. The juice must be crushed before it sours. The boiling must continue without waste. This is one of the blunt truths of plantation life in the Caribbean and parts of Brazil and Louisiana in the 1830s. Sugar is profitable because it is relentless. The crop demands heat, speed, and a terrible amount of labour, and that demand lands on human bodies first. Your feet meet the floor, cool earth, a moment later, warm dust. You tie what cloth you have around yourself and adjust it by touch. The garment is coarse, worn pale by washing and weather, then dark again with work. Some women wrap a headcloth if they own one, partly for modesty, partly for sweat, partly because hair catches ash and cane fibres all day. There is no mirror waiting to flatter you. There is only the habit of your own hands. Near the doorway, a small ember still glows under ash. Someone kneels to breathe life into it. Smoke rises sharp and bitter, making your eyes sting. A pot is set back over the coals, and whatever remains from yesterday is stirred thin with water. You swallow a few hurried mouthfuls. It is not enough, but enough is not the measure here. Enough would suggest concern. This place runs on quantity, not kindness. When you step outside, the sky is not yet blue. It is a deep grey with a little silver pressed low on the horizon. Huts stand in rows, some leaning, some patched, all marked by use. The yards between them hold chickens, broken tools, heaps of cane trash, and footprints hardened into the ground. Women move like shadows, lifting babies, shaking older children awake, tying cloth, balancing small tasks before the larger one arrives. Men emerge too, some already carrying hoes or knives. No one wastes breath on cheerful chatter. Morning comes too early for that. You start walking with the others toward the open yard near the works. The path is uneven under your soles, packed in some places, slick in others. Dew wets your ankles where grass crowds the edge. The air carries two strong smells at once. Fresh cane, green and sweet. Burned cane syrup, heavy and scorched. It is an odd pairing, almost pleasant for a second, until you remember what it means. It means the mill never truly sleeps. In 1835, on many plantations, black women worked in more places than plantation records like to admit. Planters often wrote as if men belonged to field gangs and women filled lighter roles, but the reality was harsher and far less tidy. Women hoed cane, weeded rows, planted shoots, carried bundles, fed animals, cooked, washed, nursed children, hauled water, and sometimes laboured near the mill or boiling house where the heat was ferocious. Plantation bookkeeping loved categories. Human life ignored them. You enter the yard where the gang is gathering, and the light from torches throws orange across faces still marked by sleep. An overseer sits upright on a horse nearby, looking as pleased as a man can look when his whole personality depends on other people being tired. He watches the rows form, drivers move among the workers, counting, checking, urging speed. Delay is treated as insolence. Fatigue is treated as an excuse. Illness is treated with suspicion, unless it becomes impossible to hide. A baby cries somewhere behind you. The sound does not last long. Another woman takes the child while the mother moves into line. This happens without speech, because it has happened before and will happen again. Plantation life forces a harsh kind of cooperation. You learn each other's needs by rhythm. A hand reaches when it can. A bowl is shared when possible. A child is carried by whoever still has strength in her back. The eastern sky begins to pale. Cane fields spread out like walls around the estate, tall and rustling, their leaves edged sharp enough to cut skin. In daylight the stalks will shine green and gold. Right now they stand dark and wet, whispering in the breeze as if the field itself is awake before the people in it. You look at the long rows and know exactly how much of your body they will claim today. Your shoulders know, your hands know, your lower back knows with a deep, private certainty. Historians agree on much about sugar plantations, yet they still debate the precise division of labour from island to island and from estate to estate, especially where the surviving records were written by owners who preferred neat fictions over messy truth. That uncertainty matters, because women's labour was often hidden inside bland words like field hand or domestic. Those words flatten whole lives. The mill looms ahead, built for crushing. Wooden rollers or iron ones, depending on the estate's wealth, wait to seize the cane. Oxen may turn the machinery, or water, or steam in some places where capital has arrived with new ambitions. The grinding sound can be stomach-turning when the work begins in full, not only because it is loud, but because people know what careless seconds can cost. Limbs have been drawn in, hands have been lost. Stories travel quickly in plantation quarters, and not because anyone is trying to entertain you. Near the boiling house, the air changes. Even before sunrise, warmth rolls out from the open doors. Inside, copper kettles sit in sequence over flame, and cane juice moves from one to the next as it thickens. Steam carries sweetness so dense it almost feels chewable. Molasses sticks to surfaces. Soot clings to beams. The smell is rich, smoky, and faintly rotten all at once. It is the smell of money for someone else. There is a strange tidbit buried in some plantation accounts and travellers' remarks. Dogs, pigs, and even birds were drawn to the sugary waste around the works, and so were children, who sometimes licked crystallized drips from barrels or scooped up scraps when they could. Imagine that. In a place built to produce sweetness by the ton, the people forced to make it might only taste it in stolen traces. The day's first orders spread outward. Some women are sent to the fields, others remain near the yards, kitchens, livestock, or trashing piles where old cane leaves must be stripped and cleared. You move where told. There is no ceremony. The plantation does not care what task fits your mood. Mood is a luxury for free people, and even they do not always get much of it. As you walk toward the cane, the soil clings to your feet. The field smells green, wet, and slightly metallic where cut leaves dry on the ground. Mosquitoes drift near standing water. The first birds begin, not in one sweet chorus, but in little uncertain calls from tree lines and hedges. Dawn arrives in layers here. Grey becomes pearl. Pearl becomes rose. Then suddenly the clouds catch fire and the whole horizon turns into something beautiful enough to be almost rude. Beauty is inconvenient that way. You bend to your work, hands move through habit, pull, clear, lift, gather. The motions settle into your muscles because they must. A woman beside you murmurs something dry under her breath about the overseer's posture, and another nearly laughs without letting the sound escape. There it is, that tiny surviving spark of humour, gentle sarcasm in the dirt before sunrise. Even here, someone can still be ridiculous. The work gang stretches down the row, headcloths bob between stalks, bare arms darken with dew, then slick with sweat once the sun rises higher. Cane leaves brush your skin with thin cuts that sting more as salt gathers in them. Ants find your ankles, mud cakes and hardens. You keep moving because stopping draws attention, and attention is rarely your friend. A plantation like this is a machine disguised as a landscape. The house on the hill, the curing rooms, the cattle pens, the boiling house, the mill, the trash heaps, the huts, the water casks, the cane rows. All of it is arranged around extraction. Even ordinary sounds feed that purpose. Bell, hoofbeats, kettle hiss, knife against stalk, cartwheel over ruts, a shouted order, a baby's brief cry swallowed by distance. Yet within that machine, women build a second life no ledger can measure, a shared glance, a warning passed in one word, a song hummed too softly for punishment, a scrap of cloth saved for a child, a memory spoken at night of a mother, a river, a market, a proverb, a seasoning, a prayer. Survival is made of such fragments. The sun finally clears the horizon and warmth gathers fast. You feel it on your face first, then on your neck, then all over like a hand pressing down. Sweat slips along your spine. The smell of earth begins to bake. Cane scent grows sharper. Somewhere nearby, someone has rubbed herbs between the fingers, and for one passing moment the air carries a green, peppery freshness that cuts through mud and smoke. Small mercies arrive in odd disguises. You glance toward the road and see the big house catching the new light. Pale walls glowing softly through trees. It looks peaceful from here. Of course it does. Distance is excellent at producing innocence. The plantation always appears most orderly to those who benefit from not looking closely. By full morning the estate is awake in every direction. Smoke lifts straight up where the air is still. Carts creak under loads. Children too young for the heaviest work drift around the yards under older eyes. Older women, pregnant women, injured women, women trusted with skilled domestic labour, all carry different burdens. But the burden is there. No woman escapes labour by being female here. That fantasy belongs mostly to people writing from parlours. You straighten for one brief breath and roll your shoulders. The field spreads on and on, glistening. The sky's bright now, almost hard to look at. Your palms burn. Your stomach already feels hollow again. Still, you hold yourself upright for that second, and in that second something steady remains inside you. Not hope exactly. Hope is too airy a word for this hour. Something tougher, a refusal to vanish. The bell will ring again, orders will come again, heat will grow heavier, but this early hour has shown you the truest shape of the place. Before visitors wake, before sugar hardens white in distant cups, before merchants count profit, the plantation belongs to the women who rise in darkness, coax embers alive, quiet crying children, tie cloth over tired hair, and walk into the fields under a sky that has not yet chosen its colour. That is how the day begins, not with sweetness, but with smoke, not with luxury, but with aching hands in wet cane, not with the story told by the planter, but with the life carried by black women whose labour holds the whole estate together while the world pretends not to see it. Morning is fully opened now, and the plantation shows its true scale under the sun. What looked soft in the half-light turns exact and demanding. Rows of cane run in long green files over the land. Paths split the fields into measured strips. The works sit low and busy in the distance, their roofs breathing out smoke. Every space has a use. Every use is meant to bring profit. And you, along with countless other black women across the sugar world in 1835, are expected to move through this design as if your body were just another tool that can be lifted, worn down, and set back in place. You enter the rows with a hoe in your hand. The wood is smooth where many palms have gripped it, and rough where the grain has lifted from heat and rain. The metal edge is duller than it should be. That is common enough. Tools on plantations are often expected to last longer than they should, much like the people holding them. You bend at the waist and begin the repeated motion of chopping weeds from the earth around young cane. Down, pull, lift, step, down again. The rhythm comes quickly, because there is no point resisting the rhythm when it will return all day anyway. The field is louder than it first seemed. Cane leaves hiss against one another in the breeze. Insects whine near your ears. A cart rattles somewhere beyond the rows, iron rims striking stone. From the road comes the dull knock of the hooves. Voices rise and fade. Drivers call for faster hands. Someone coughs hard and keeps coughing. A woman nearby clears her throat and begins a low work tune without words, just a thread of sound to pace the muscles. No one stops her at first. Perhaps the driver thinks it helps the gang move faster. Perhaps he's too lazy to object. Tyranny does have its sleepy moments. The sun climbs with a kind of confidence that feels personal. Sweat gathers on your upper lip and under your arms. It trickles along the spine and disappears into your waistband. Your hands tighten around the hoe handle until your knuckles ache. Dirt spatters your calves. The smell rising from the disturbed soil is damp and mineral, almost cool in the first hour. But that coolness will not last. By midday the ground will give off heat of its own. Women are spread all through the work. Some weed young cane. Some carry bundles of cut stalks from smaller plots. Some clean trash from the rows, stripping dead leaves and tossing them aside so the cane can breathe and labour can move more quickly through it. Some are in the provision grounds or near the livestock. Some remain in the yard kitchens, cooking for others with one hand while settling children with the other. A plantation can pretend jobs are separate. Real life never keeps the categories neat. One woman may spend a morning in the field and part of the afternoon hauling water. Another may wash clothes, then carry food, then gather fuel. Black women are used wherever need presses hardest. This is one of the central truths of slavery on sugar estates. Women were not sheltered from hard agricultural labour simply because they were women. On many plantations they formed a large part of the field gangs and performed labour that demanded endurance, speed and strength. Owners might speak of women as weaker when it suited excuses about output, or as sturdy when it suited demands for labour. The contradiction did not trouble them. Convenient thinking rarely does. You pause just enough to shift your grip and wipe your forehead with the back of your wrist. The salt stings your eyes. A leaf edge catches the skin along your forearm and leaves a thin, burning line. Cane can slice like paper. Only Mina. Cuts multiply without drama. By afternoon they become a map of the day. At the far side of the row, a young girl works beside older women, learning not through kindness but through imitation. She watches the swing of the hoe, the angle of the shoulders, the pace that avoids notice. Childhood on a plantation has very little room for drifting. Even before full labour is demanded, children absorb its choreography, how to carry, how to watch, how to stay silent when silence is safer, how to read the mood of the person with power before the first word is spoken. It is an education no parent would choose, yet every parent here must teach survival inside it. A driver walks the row, stick in hand. He does not need to strike every day to be feared every day. His power lives in possibility. He stops by one woman whose pace has slipped, perhaps from dizziness, perhaps from the simple scandal of having a human spine. He says something sharp. She lowers her eyes and moves faster. Everyone hears. No one comments. The field keeps working, because fields on plantations are theatres as much as workplaces. Discipline is meant to be seen. There are women whose labour takes them out of the main cane rows for part of the day, but that does not mean softness. You may be ordered toward the mill yard where loaded carts arrive. Cane stalks, newly cut, must be moved quickly. Freshness matters. Once the stalk begins drying or fermenting, the sugar yield can suffer. Planters know this and become almost poetic about urgency, though not about the body's sacrifice to satisfy it. You take hold of a bundle with another woman and feel the weight drag at the shoulders. The stalks are slick and fibrous. Sweet juice wets your palms where the cane has split. It smells green and bright, almost cheerful. Strange that something so cheerful in smell can belong to such grim labour. In harvest season, often called crop time, the pace turns harsher still. Cutting and grinding can continue around the clock. Night and day lose their clear boundary. The mills demand feed. The boiling house demands juice. The curing house waits for crystals and molasses. People sleep in fragments when they can. Women in these periods may labour in the field. Then return to domestic burdens that do not politely pause just because a plantation has entered frenzy. A hungry child still needs feeding. Clothes still need rinsing. Water still must be carried. Bodies still fall ill. Historians still dispute exactly how often women work directly in the mill or boiling process on particular islands, because records are uneven and observers loved making broad claims from narrow glimpses. Yet there is no real doubt that women were deeply woven into the production chain, whether in the rules, the yards, the transport, the kitchens, or the support labour that made continuous grinding possible. Sugar required a whole social world of forced effort, and women stood near the centre of it. You move closer to the works and hear the mill before you step beside it. The rollers groan and clack. Cane feeds in. Crushed stalk emerges flattened, almost ghostly, stripped of its juice. Men and women nearby work with quick caution, because the machine is unforgiving. Steam or animal power, depending on the estate, gives the place an air of mechanical hunger. The scent is thick here, fresh sap, hot metal, wet fibre, mud trampled by many feet, smoke curling from the furnaces. Sweetness in this place is never delicate, it arrives loud and sticky. A woman at the coppers stirs with a long implement, face shining with heat. Firelight flashes on the kettle rims. The boiling house is like stepping into a throat. The air presses against you. Your skin feels damp at once. Molasses spatters when the syrup shifts and bubbles. Ash drifts onto forearms and cheeks. Eyes water. Some women assigned near the boilers gain skill from experience, learning when the liquid has changed texture, when scum should be skimmed, when the timing is off by a breath. That skill is real. Though planters often preferred to treat enslaved labour as crude and replaceable. Funny how the system depended on expertise while pretending expertise did not exist. Quirky details of plantation life sometimes survive in complaints from owners. Some grumbled that women in the boiling house talked too much, laughed too much, or traded too many comments while working. Imagine that being your crisis. Not the cruelty, not the burns, not the exhaustion. The possibility that women standing beside vats of molten sweetness might exchange a few words. Oppression is often ridiculous in its vanity. By late morning you are sent toward another task, a headload, perhaps. A tub balanced with practice against the crown or supported on cloth. The neck stiffens. The spine learns to stack itself beneath the weight. Feet feel each rut in the yard. You pass chickens scratching by the huts, a dog sleeping under a cart, a child using a stick to trace circles in the dirt while keeping one eye on the adults. Smoke from a cook fire drifts low and smells of cassava, salt fish, and green wood not fully dry. Your stomach tightens at the smell. Hunger sharpens when food is near but not for you yet. The kitchens are no paradise. Women labour there too, sweating over large pots, measuring small rations, stretching poor ingredients into something that can keep people upright. They chop plantains, stir cornmeal, salt meat, beans, or whatever the plantation issues and the local economy allows. They may cook for the enslaved population, the white staff, or the big house, each setting demanding something different. Domestic labour is often imagined as gentler because it happens under a roof. Roofs do not remove strain, they simply rearrange it. A woman washing clothes at a trough has red hands from lye and scrubbing. Another tends a small child on her hip while blowing at a fire. Another is sent to the great house carrying water jars, moving between servant role and field status depending on the owner's need. The social ranking within plantation labour can be sharp, and people notice it. Some positions offer slightly better food, slightly different clothing, or a measure of reduced exposure to field violence. But closeness to the house can also mean constant surveillance, sexual danger, and the need to perform obedience with exhausting precision. There is no clean category called easy. You're ordered next to gather fuel and cane trash for the furnaces. Dry leaves rasp against your wrists as you lift them. Bits of fibre cling to your skin. Smoke from the work settles into your hair and cloth until everything smells faintly burnt, even the sweat. The plantation consumes enormous amounts of material besides human labour. Wood for fires, water for boiling and washing, animals for transport, barrels for storage, rope, iron, carts, copper, and always more labour. As though labour grows wild like weeds. Some women know the estate in a way the owner never will. They know where the ground stays damp after rain. They know which path is fastest when carrying weight. They know where fever has appeared in the huts. They know which child has a cough, which elder cannot chew hard food, which driver is in a temper, which dog bites, which tree gives the best shade for 2 stolen minutes of breath. This is knowledge made from attention. It is practical, intimate, and essential. Near noon, heat settles like a lid over the land. The air barely moves. Shirt cloth sticks to the back. The iron on tools grows hot enough to notice. Flies thicken around the yard. The smell of manure, boiling syrup, and sun-struck cane becomes almost dizzying. You feel a pulsing behind the eyes. No one calls this suffering impressive. It is simply the weather plus labour, repeated so often that pain becomes part of the climate. A brief meal may come, depending on the day and the plantation. It is taken quickly. A gourd, a bowl, a handful. Women squat in whatever shade exists, knees aching, mouths busy, hands still half ready for work because the bell can call at any moment. Conversation stays low. Someone shares a tiny joke about the overseer's horse being treated better than half the people on the estate. It is funny because it is true. It is also not funny at all. Then labour resumes. The afternoon brings different tasks for different women. Some go back into the rows for hoeing and weeding. Some strip cane tops for fodder. Some carry water to those working farther from the yard. Some tend children while trying to complete assigned chores nearby. Some patch sacks, mend garments, or clean processing spaces where sugar residue hardens like glue. Your shoulders ache now in a deeper way, less sharp, more settled. The body begins negotiating with itself, not whether it is tired, whether it can continue despite the answer. You feel the roughness of rope against your palm, the slick film of sweat on your neck, the prickle of dried cane dust behind the knees. The plantation keeps presenting textures: splintered wood, hot metal, packed earth, wet cloth, ash, syrup, stiffened fingers. It is a life learned through touch as much as sight. A scholar once might have described plantation labour in cool economic terms, as if output figures could explain the human scene. But the field teaches differently. It teaches in sting, weight, thirst, and repetition. It teaches that women's work here is not an added detail. It is structure. Without it, the crop stalls, the yard falters, the kitchens fail, the children go untended, the fires die, the carts do not load, the clothes do not wash, the whole grim engine begins to wobble. And still, in the middle of this pressing day, women find ways to remain themselves. One ties her headcloth with an elegant fold. One slips a little seasoning into the pot when she can get it. One sings a line her mother sang. One mutters a clever insult too softly for punishment. One shares a drink of water before the driver turns back. One keeps alive the stubborn fact that she is more than the task in her hands. By the time the sun begins its slow slide, the labour has already crossed through several worlds: field, yard, kitchen, mill, fire, water, childcare, carrying, tending, waiting, enduring. The day has not been one thing. It has been many things piled on the same tired body. That is what life was really like for black women on sugar plantations. Not a single role, not a single hardship, not a neat image in a ledger. It was layered labour, every hour asking for something else. Every corner of the estate ready to claim another measure of strength. By the middle of the day, the plantation stops pretending to be merely a workplace and becomes something more physical, more intimate, more exhausting. It presses itself onto your skin. It enters your mouth with dust. It settles in your clothes. It bakes into your muscles. Hunger, heat, and rough fabric stay with you so closely that they feel less like separate hardships and more like a second body you must carry around inside your own. Your clothing is simple because simplicity is cheaper. A coarse shift or wrapper hangs against the skin, stiff in some places, loose in others, rubbed thin by washing and labour. The cloth may once have had a proper shape, but repeated use has made it sag where it should hold and tighten where it should fall. Seams rub under the arms. Waist ties bite when soaked with sweat. If you have a headcloth, it catches the salt before it runs into your eyes. Though by noon it feels damp and heavy, as if it too has given up and joined the heat. Planters and estate managers often issued clothing by count, not comfort. A few garments for the year, perhaps some rough cloth to be made into garments, perhaps shoes for certain workers, though many went barefoot much of the time. The theory, on paper, might sound almost orderly. The reality was wear, patching, improvisation, and shortage. Addressed it as on cane, and you mend it by firelight, a cloth phrase at the edge, and you fold it over. A child outgrows a garment, and another child inherits it with one sleeve shorter than the other. There is no little seasonal wardrobe here. The plantation provides just enough to maintain labour, then congratulates itself for generosity. Bare feet tell their own story. The ground is not one ground but many. Packed yard dirt hard as brick in dry weather. Mud after rain that sucks at the heel. Sharp cane stubble in cut areas. Pebbles on the road that jab the soul. Hot dust by afternoon that seems to store sunlight just to punish the next step. Your feet toughen because they must. Skin thickens, cuts heal into pale marks. Toes learn balance under headloads and on slick edges near troughs. Yet toughness is not invulnerability. A stone still bruises, a thorn still enters, a hidden splinter still burns with every step. The heat is its own master. It rises from above, rolls from the side, and pushes upward from the earth. Clothing traps it. Shade only softens it. By this hour the air feels almost chewable, thick with sugar vapour from the works and the warm smell of trampled plants. Sweat comes so steadily that drying is a brief rumour between efforts. It gathers at the neck, under the breasts, along the back of the knees, beneath the cloth tied around the waist. Salt dries white on darker fabric. It leaves the skin itchy, then sore, then numb with familiarity. You taste hunger in strange ways. It sharpens the nose. The smell of boiling cornmeal from a distant pot suddenly feels as rich as a feast. The scent of roasting plantain drifts on the breeze and makes your stomach clench. A scrap of saltfish, a spoon of peas, cassava, maize, yam, plantain. Whatever the ration or local provisioning allows, all take on an importance too large for their size. Meals do not arrive with leisure. They are swallowed quickly, often while planning the next task. Hunger does not end after eating. It merely quiets for a short while, like a child told to hush. This was common across much of the sugar world. Plantation rations were often inadequate in quality or quantity, and many enslaved people relied on provision grounds, market trade, fishing, or small garden plots when permitted. Black women played a major role in making food stretch. They pounded, boiled, stewed, roasted, seasoned, and portioned with the practical genius that hunger creates. A little pepper could wake dull food. A handful of herbs could change the whole smell of a pot. That knowledge was not decorative. It kept people going at a short break. You crouch with a bowl warm in your hands. The surface is rough, chipped at the lip. Steam rises and fogs your face for one lovely second. The food inside is plain, but plain food is not the same as unimportant food. You blow across it, swallow too fast, feel the heat travel down into the hollow space inside you. Someone next to you tears a piece of cooked yam and chews slowly, eyes half closed, as if for that moment the yam deserves a prayer. Perhaps it does. Women often had to feed others before they properly fed themselves. A child is handed the softer portion. An elder gets what can be spared. A baby is settled first. This kind of triage becomes instinctive. The body may be tired enough to shake, but the hand still reaches toward the smaller mouth. It is not because suffering makes people noble. It is because affection survives even in systems built to crush it. Love becomes practical here. It stirs pots. It saves crumbs. It checks foreheads for fever. There is a harsh irony in sugar labour. You're surrounded by sweetness and yet live in want. The cane smells sweet when cut. The juice smells sweet when crushed. The boiling house is saturated with sweetness so thick it clings to the tongue. Molasses may stick to a barrel rim. Syrup may harden in drips along the side of a trough. Still, the finished product is destined elsewhere. refined into wealth for people far from the field, the workers who make it may taste it only in accidental smears, stolen drops, or occasional scraps. The plantation manufactures luxury and rations hunger. Some observers left little comments about enslaved workers chewing pieces of fresh cane when they could. That small act was practical and delicious at once. Cane gives moisture, a burst of sugar, a moment of relief to a dry mouth. You strip the rind with your teeth, bite into the fibre, and the juice spreads cool and bright across the tongue. For a second, the plantation's most prized commodity belongs to your own mouth and no one else's account book. Small victory. Very sticky victory. But still, the skin pays for everything. Sun darkens and toughens it, though the heat still punishes all the same. Mosquitoes mark ankles and wrists. Sand fleas find the soft places between toes. Cane leaves scratch the forearms. Smoke settles in the pores. Soap, when available, is simple and harsh. Water may be near, but clean water is not always easy to claim in the quantity needed for comfort. Washing becomes functional. You rinse what you can, when you can, with what time remains. Hair needs care too, though care must fit into stolen minutes. A head wrap protects against dust and sun, keeps hair contained during labour, and can serve as a sign of dignity as much as necessity. Women braided, tied, wrapped, and arranged their hair with attention even in brutal conditions. That matters. It was not vanity, it was selfhood. A neat wrap says you still belong to yourself in some interior way. Despite the plantation's opinion on the matter, historians still argue over the exact nutritional balance available to enslaved workers on particular estates, because plantation records list rations in a cold shorthand, while actual access depended on theft, weather, local markets, gardens, illness, and the honesty of managers. Numbers can suggest sufficiency while bodies tell a different story. Thin arms, swollen bellies in children, dizzy workers, women trying to nurse on poor diets. These are records too, though not always written down. You stand again too soon. Food is barely settled when the next task begins. The cloth on your back, wet with sweat, cools for a minute in the breeze and then turns warm again under the sun. It rubs along the shoulder blades. Dust clings to damp skin until you feel coated in a fine grit. Part flour, part ash, part earth. Your body is never simply your body here. It is always in negotiation with weather, labour, and material. Some women carry water in gourds, jars, or buckets, and even water has a different character depending on source and temperature. Cool water from a shaded cask tastes of relief itself. Pond water can smell green and still. Rainwater caught clean may taste almost sweet. Warm water from a container left in the sun is better than none, though not by much. You drink carefully when allowed. Knowing too much too quickly can cramp a working body. Even thirst requires strategy. The smell of the plantation changes with heat. Morning soil gives way to afternoon dust. Fresh-cut cane turns from bright green to a sweeter, heavier scent as it wilts. Animal smells thicken around pens and cart paths. Kitchen smoke becomes greasy and rich as food cooks. Near the works, the air is dense with hot syrup, ash, fermenting residue, and something metallic from the machinery. Each zone has its own atmosphere, and women move through all of them, carrying one smell into the next until every garment becomes a history of the day. A curious detail from plantation life appears in scattered descriptions from the era. Some women perfumed head wraps or skin with crushed leaves, citrus peel, or herbs when they had access to them. Not grand perfume, of course. Nothing that belongs in a polished bottle. Just little fragrant acts. A rubbed leaf tucked in cloth. A peel passed over the wrists. A green scent carried for an hour. It sounds tiny, perhaps even trivial, till you imagine how precious a clean. Living smell might be in a world of sweat, smoke, and cane rot. The body learns economy. You squat rather than kneel when possible, because the knees have had enough. You shift weight from one hip to the other while waiting. You use the stronger hand for the heavier lift. You rest a basket on the thigh before raising it higher. You save unnecessary motion the way other people save coins. A skilled worker is not merely strong, she is efficient. The plantation notices output. But inside that output are thousands of small decisions made by women who understand their own bodies better than any overseer ever could. Pregnant women faced especially bitter demands. On some plantations, they might be assigned lighter work in theory, yet lighter often still meant long hours, heat, carrying, or repetitive labour. Nursing mothers had to find ways to feed infants around work schedules that cared more for crop timing than for the human body. A crying baby and an impatient driver make a cruel pair. Milk can come poorly when food is scarce and fatigue is deep. Still, mothers tried. Of course they tried. Children read scarcity quickly. They know who gets the larger spoonful. They know when the pot is thin. They learn to eat without dawdling. They watch women save peels, bones, drippings, and every usable scrap. The kitchen yard becomes a school of salvage. Nothing useful is wasted if skill can rescue it. A bit of fat can flavour a pot. Ground maize can stretch a meal. Leaves can become wrapping. Ash can help with cleaning. A cracked pot might still serve if turned just so over the fire. The plantation wastes human lives with ease, but the people within it cannot afford such waste. Your shoulders begin to ache from carrying. The ache is no longer sharp enough to command attention. It becomes background, like insects or distant wheels. That may be one of the cruelest adaptations. Pain becomes ordinary. The body, with astonishing obedience, turns suffering into routine. Yet routine is not acceptance. It is simply what survival looks like from the inside. By later afternoon, the cloth at your chest smells of salt and smoke. Your hands smell of cane, earth, and whatever food touched them hours ago. Your lips feel dry despite the sweat. Dust has settled into the lines of your palms. If you rub your fingers together, they feel both slick and rough, syrup and grit at once. The skin on your neck burns where the sun found a gap in the headcloth. Everything asks to be washed, fed, cooled, rested. Little of that asking will be answered immediately, and still, there are moments that reveal a fierce grace in ordinary endurance. A woman reties another's wrap with quick, deft fingers. Someone shares a slice of roasted plantain saved from a meal. Someone laughs quietly at the absurd dignity of the plantation cat, who strolls through the yard like the true owner of the estate. These moments do not erase deprivation. They sit beside it. They prove that want does not fully strip away personality, humour, or care. What life was really like is often hidden inside these bodily details. Not just labour in the grand historical sense, but the constant friction between flesh and cloth, appetite and ration, heat and shade, thirst and distance, fatigue and the next command. Black women on sugar plantations lived history through the body every hour. They felt empire in the seams of a dress, in the bite of sun on bare skin, in the emptiness between meals, in the rough rim of a bowl, in the sweetness of a stolen chew of cane, and in the stubborn tenderness with which they still fed, dressed, and tended one another. The afternoon light turns harsher before it turns soft. It flattens the yard, sharpens the cane rows, and makes every movement easier to see. That matters on a sugar plantation, because so much of daily life depends on watching and being watched. Power here does not only arrive with force, it arrives with eyes. The overseer watches for delay, the driver watches for slack hands. The mistress may watch for posture, tone, and speed in the houseyard. Even other enslaved people must sometimes watch carefully, because danger often travels through whispers, moods, and shifting rules long before it shows itself openly. You learn to read faces the way sailors read weather. A narrowed eye can mean suspicion. A lazy voice can mean false calm before anger. The set of a shoulder, the way boots strike the dirt, the sudden silence in a yard, all of these become signs. You notice who has been drinking. You notice who is impatient. You notice whether the order is likely to be repeated or punished. This kind of attention is exhausting, but it keeps people safer than ignorance ever could. Plantation surveillance is not tidy. It is uneven, personal, and intimate. A driver may hover over one gang and neglect another. A bookkeeper may become fussy about numbers one day and careless the next. A white woman in the great house may obsess over clean linens while ignoring the hunger that launders them. Rules can feel absolute in the morning and arbitrary by sunset. The instability is part of the power. If the line keeps shifting, you must spend even more energy guessing where it lies. Still, within that pressure, women develop quiet forms of resistance that are easy to miss if you only read official records. The records love obvious rebellion because it can be punished and described. They are far less skilled at noticing small refusals folded into ordinary acts. A slower step here, a misunderstood order there, a tool misplaced for half an hour, a task done carefully, but not quickly. A message passed through a glance. A child steered out of the path of trouble before trouble arrives. None of this looks grand from a distance. That is the point. You carry a basket through the yard and keep your expression settled, almost blank. Inside, your attention is busy. One woman by the cook fire has shifted the pot slightly off the strongest heat, stretching time before the next serving is expected. Another has sent a girl to fetch water by the longer path, not because the water is better, but because the girl's mother needs one more minute to finish nursing an infant in partial privacy. A third woman answers a command with perfect politeness, and then completes the task in the way that causes the least strain to an elder nearby. Tiny acts, yet they alter the day. Sugar plantations were brutal precisely because time was money in a very direct way. Cane had to be planted, cut, crushed, boiled, cured, packed. Any interruption threatened profit. That made control obsessive. It also created openings. When a system is built on relentless timing, even very small delays can matter. Enslaved workers knew this. Historians have found evidence across plantation societies of sabotage, slowdowns, feigned illness, breakage, theft of provisions, concealment of tools, and other everyday forms of resistance. Women participated in these acts, though their actions were often under-recorded or dismissed as incompetence by people who preferred not to recognize defiance. You stoop near a stack of cane trash and hear a murmur behind you. Not your name. No one is careless enough for that. Just a phrase, ordinary on the surface, carrying a warning underneath. The driver is in a sour mood. The overseer is circling back. The mistress is coming into the yard. Language bends in places like this. Words learn double duty. A remark about weather can mean danger. A question about cooking can hide a message about movement. Silence, too, can be eloquent. There is humour in the quarters and fields, though it has to be nimble. You hear it in the dry tone women use when speaking about white authority out of earshot. The overseer becomes a rooster with boots. The bookkeeper becomes a man who can count barrels but not blessings. The mistress becomes a queen of spoons and dust. This humour does not make the system lighter. It makes the people inside it harder to crush completely. To laugh, even briefly, is to refuse the plantation's demand that fear be your only language. One of the strangest things about oppressive systems is how often they fear laughter. A woman who jokes may look too alive, too inwardly free, too difficult to reduce to a number in a ledger. A few travellers even complained that enslaved women seemed impertinent because they laughed among themselves. Imagine that being what offends you, not theft of labour, not torn families. Laughter. Tyranny is always shocked when the people under it still possess personalities. You move through the late afternoon with careful timing. Resistance is not always saying no. Sometimes it's saying yes in a tone that conceals your real meaning. Sometimes it is agreeing, then choosing the less destructive method. Sometimes it is guarding your true thoughts so thoroughly that no command can quite reach them. That guarded interior life matters. Enslavers wanted labour, obedience, and the appearance of submission. They could seize the first two more easily than the third. The mind was often the last stubborn room. Women also protected one another through practical knowledge. If a punishment seemed likely, an older woman might advise a younger one how to answer, how low to keep her eyes, when to speak, when not to. If illness needed hiding for a few hours, someone might take over a task just long enough to mask the weakness. If a child had wandered too near the mill yard, several hands redirected the child before a white eye could notice. Protection on a plantation was rarely dramatic. It was pieced together from habit, speed, and mutual observation. There were also risks inside enslaved communities. Drivers were often enslaved men placed in positions of authority over others. Some used that power harshly. Some tried to soften it where they could. Some shifted between both depending on pressure from above. Women had to navigate these internal hierarchies as well. balancing caution, resentment, kinship, and necessity. Plantation life did not offer pure moral arrangements, it offered crowded human ones. Scholars still disagree about how best to interpret certain acts in the archive. Was a broken tool an accident, exhaustion, or sabotage? Was an absence caused by illness, care work, or purposeful avoidance? When a manager wrote that women were lazy, was he describing reality or merely expressing frustration that their labour could not be squeezed further? Those uncertainties matter. Because plantation records were written by people invested in misunderstanding the enslaved. What they called disorder might have been strategy. What they dismissed as foolishness might have been resistance wearing a mask. The house yard has its own style of control. The eye there is often closer, quieter, more fussy. A woman carrying plates or linens may be judged on neatness, speed, posture, tone, even the sound of her feet on the floor. A misplaced spoon can produce a storm of complaint out of all proportion to its size. Domestic labour demands performance. You must appear calm even when hurried, deferential even when insulted, invisible and attentive at once. It is a nearly impossible combination, which is perhaps why households demanded it so eagerly. And yet domestic spaces could also become sites of manoeuvre. Food might be saved in scraps. Information might be overheard. A longer route to the wash-house could create a minute of conversation. A task in the pantry might allow a worker to slip a crust or peel to someone else later. The plantation tries to map every movement, but human beings keep making side paths. You pass near the wash area where garments slap against stone in a hard wet rhythm. A woman there is speaking softly to another while wringing out cloth. Their hands never stop. Their faces reveal almost nothing. But the exchange is alive with intent. News moves along these invisible lines. Someone on a neighbouring state has run away. A baby was born in the night. A manager is leaving. A fever has begun. A ship has arrived at the port. The enslaved world is often imagined by outsiders as isolated, but information travelled through markets, kin, sailors, hired labour, coachmen, washerwomen, and children. Black women were major keepers and carriers of that circulation. A quirky little detail turns up in scattered accounts from plantation regions. Women sometimes use songs with ordinary-sounding words to carry layered meanings about work, mood, warning, memory, or mockery. Not every song was coded, of course, and historians are rightly cautious about romanticising secrecy everywhere. But rhythm itself could shape labour, help coordinate movement, or create a shared emotional space beyond the overseer's understanding. A song need not be a secret message to be a form of resistance. Sometimes maintaining a communal pulse is resistance enough. Toward evening, fatigue makes everyone slower, and slowness attracts scrutiny. This is when quiet skills matter most. You learn how to look busy while stealing a breath. You learn how to spread effort through the whole body rather than spending it all in one motion. You learn when to stand near others, because a group absorbs attention differently than a person alone. You learn that there are moments to vanish into the ordinary and moments to be seen helping, carrying, mending, because usefulness can function as cover. The plantation never stops trying to turn people into predictable units. Women answer by remaining unpredictable in small ways. A child memorizes more than the adults expect. An elder keeps knowledge of herbs, no ledger records. A cook changes a ration enough to keep someone stronger for the next day. A field worker preserves energy with a technique taught by her mother. A washerwoman overhears a conversation and sends the news through 3 yards before dusk. Power may sit in the saddle or the counting room, but intelligence is everywhere. You see it in posture. One woman bows her head when addressed, but her eyes miss nothing. Another speaks so mildly that white people assume she's simple, while half the quarter relies on her judgment. Another can smooth a quarrel before it becomes dangerous. Another knows how to charm an extra ladle from the kitchen stores. Another keeps children quiet when silence is life-preserving. Another can insult a tyrant so delicately that it sounds almost like praise. Human talent does not vanish under coercion, it adapts. By now the light has shifted. The blazing afternoon has softened into amber, and long shadows lie across the yard. The cane rustles in a lower voice. Smoke from cooking fires spreads flatter in the evening air. This hour can feel briefly looser, though not safe. Orders still come. Counts still happen. Someone is always watching, or might be. But the edges blur enough for those small acts of self-direction to multiply. A look exchanged, a spoon hidden, a child gathered close, a complaint transformed into a joke, a minute borrowed from the plantation and returned as if untouched. What life was really like for black women on sugar plantations included these constant calculations. Not simply suffering in a passive sense, but thinking through danger hour by hour, reading power, protecting one another, bending tasks where possible, and keeping hold of inward life beneath external control. Resistance was not only revolt, flight, or fire, though those belong to the larger history too. It was also the daily art of remaining a person in a system designed to make personhood inconvenient. So you keep moving through the yard with measured steps, watched and watching, tired but alert. The plantation sees a labouring woman carrying out orders. It does not fully see the mind behind the lowered gaze, the quick arithmetic of risk, the loyalty hidden inside ordinary chores, or the stubborn wit that survives under pressure. And perhaps that failure of vision is one of the few mercies available. The system depends on looking at black women constantly. It never fully manages to understand what it sees. The air feels different where mothers and children gather, not softer exactly. The plantation is not in the habit of becoming soft. But the sounds change. You hear the wet little cough of an infant, the restless shuffle of a child too tired to sit still, the low murmur of women soothing, warning, feeding, and calling names under their breath. In a world ruled by bells, mills, and shouted commands, these smaller sounds matter. They are the sounds of life, insisting on itself. Motherhood under slavery is never just motherhood. It is labour folded inside labour, love pressed under fear, tenderness forced to work around schedules that care nothing for the body. A pregnant woman may still hoe, carry, weed, cook, wash, bend, lift, and stand for long hours. A nursing mother may be expected back at a task while her child still roots hungrily against her. There is no clean pause granted by the plantation simply because a baby has arrived. Birth is treated less as a sacred threshold than as an interruption to management. You watch a woman settle herself on a low stool near a wall warm from the sun. Her dress is damp at the chest. A baby fusses, fists opening and closing, searching by instinct. She shifts the cloth, brings the child close, and for one brief moment the whole frantic logic of the estate seems to fall quiet around that latch. The baby drinks. The mother exhales. A fly circles and is brushed away. Smoke from a nearby cook fire drifts over, smelling of ash and green wood. Somewhere a kettle lid rattles. The world remains busy. But inside that small circle of feeding there is a kind of fierce stillness. Enslaved women bore children under conditions shaped by hunger, overwork, disease, and constant uncertainty. Some plantation owners like to describe births in economic language, as if children were additions to property. It is a cold thought, and a revealing one. The mother's body was asked to create life, feed life, and still return quickly to forced labour, all while the system around her claimed power over that very child. There are few cruelties more intimate than that. Pregnancy did not guarantee protection. On some estates, women in later months might receive reduced tasks or altered assignments. On others, lighter work remained painfully heavy. Carrying water is still carrying. Weeding in the sun is still weeding in the sun. Standing over a wash trough with a swollen back and aching feet is no holiday. Even when managers believed they were being accommodating, their standards of mercy were often appallingly small. A woman near term might be spared the heaviest field cutting and sent instead to domestic or yard labour, as if the body would not notice the difference. You see how women adjust around one another. An older woman notices a younger one pressing a hand to her lower back and quietly shifts the heavier basket to her own side. Another keeps a child occupied with a bit of string while the mother finishes the task. Another pinches a fragment of cooked plantain from the pot and slips it into a small waiting hand. These acts happen quickly, without speech or with very little. The plantation might call them nothing. In reality, they are part of the hidden architecture of survival. Historians know a great deal about fertility. birth rates and infant mortality in plantation societies, yet scholars still dispute the exact weight of different causes from place to place. Was low birth survival driven more by malnutrition, by disease environments, by exhausting labour, by inadequate shelter, or by the emotional trauma of slavery itself? The honest answer is often all of them together, in varying proportions. Numbers alone cannot capture what it meant for a woman to carry a child while fearing loss before the child could even speak. Birth itself could happen in cramped huts, in plantation hospitals of uneven quality, or in spaces improvised in haste. Midwifery knowledge often remained in the hands of black women, especially elder women whose experience made them indispensable, even when white authorities refused them respect. Hands knew what books did not: how to turn a body, how to soothe a labouring woman, how to watch for danger in bleeding, fever, or silence, how to wrap a newborn, how to help a mother rise afterward when rising felt impossible. This was expertise born of community practice, carried from Africa, reshaped in the Americas and preserved under terrible pressure. A curious detail appears in scattered records and oral histories. Some women saved tiny scraps for newborns with astonishing care. A softened rag, a smoothed bit of cloth, a little charm sewn into a corner, a shell, bead, or thread kept for blessing or protection. These were not expensive things. They were precious because intention made them precious. In a place where so much was taken, the smallest chosen object could feel almost grand. The relationship between mother and child on a sugar plantation is marked by time stolen in fragments. A baby cries, and the mother cannot always come at once. A toddler wanders near the huts while adults work nearby, in nervous glances and interrupted attention. Older children are often tasked with minding younger ones, though they are children themselves. Affection becomes practical. You rock with one foot while chopping with your hands. You hush and stir a pot. You nurse and listen for the next order. You braid hair and watch the road. Love here is not leisurely. It is accomplished under pressure. The fear is always there. It sits just behind the ordinary motions. Illness can take a child quickly. So can poor food, bad water, heat, insects, fever, neglect from those in charge, or the simple fact of being born where life is cheap to the powerful. And beyond physical danger lies another terror: separation, sale, transfer, removal. A child is never only a child in the eyes of the plantation. A child is also labour in the making, property on a list, future value in someone else's arithmetic. A mother knows this even when she tries not to think it. You hear children learning the rules long before anyone formally teaches them. Stay quiet when the wrong feet are near. Do not touch that tool. Do not go near the rollers. Carry this to your aunt. Keep your brother beside you. Eat now. Move faster. Wait there. Some of it sounds like ordinary parenting. Some of it is emergency training disguised as ordinary parenting. Plantation childhood is crowded with danger, and women spend enormous energy reducing that danger where they can. A little girl sits on an overturned bucket, swinging one foot, her hair divided into neat parts by hands that clearly cared about the result. The style is simple, but careful. That care matters. Grooming a child, cleaning a face, tying a wrap, smoothing a collar, all these acts say something beyond usefulness. They say you are still worth tending. Dignity begins in such gestures. The plantation tries to make everybody look merely used. Women keep interrupting that plan. There were also impossible choices. A mother with too little food may favour the sickest child. A woman ordered to work may leave her baby crying because refusal brings punishment to them both. A tired older sister may snap at a younger child she loves deeply because fatigue has scraped her nerves raw. These moments do not make people less loving. They show what love looks like when trapped inside coercion. Sentimentality cannot tell the truth here. The truth is more painful and more human. You move through the yard carrying a small bundle of washing, and near the doorway of a hut an elderly woman is murmuring over a child with a feverish brow. The room smells of sweat, damp cloth, and crushed leaves. Some herbal remedy has been prepared, green and bitter in the air. Black women often held extensive knowledge of healing plants, poultices, teas, baths, and soothing methods, though outcomes depended on access, timing, and luck. Plantation doctors, when they appeared, could be useful, harmful, indifferent, or absent. In many daily matters, the first line of care was another woman. That healing role was not separate from motherhood. It extended it. Mothers, aunts, grandmothers, elder girls, all became part of a larger caregiving web. Kinship on plantations could be biological, chosen, or both. A child might have several women who claimed responsibility and practice even when the law recognized none of their claims. This wider motherhood was essential. No single woman could meet every need while being driven through labor. Community stepped in because it had to. Planters sometimes congratulated themselves on encouraging births among the enslaved population, especially where the transatlantic slave trade had changed or tightened. They liked to speak of stable labor forces and natural increase, using language so calm it almost hides the violence beneath it. But pregnancy under bondage was never simply about population. It raised agonizing questions inside families. Would this child survive? Would this child be sold? Would bringing life into slavery feel like hope, grief, duty, joy, terror, or all of them tangled together? No plantation record can answer that cleanly. Women answered in lived ways instead. They sang infants to sleep. They pressed babies to their hips while stirring supper. They teased toddlers into smiles. They warned daughters about danger earlier than any child should have to learn. They taught sons when to lower their eyes and when to run toward the huts at dusk. They passed along names, prayers, recipes, fragments of language, memory shaped into advice. A child might inherit little in material terms, but still receive an immense inheritance of knowing. One quirky thing from plantation life is how often children made toys from almost nothing. A rag tied into a doll, a carved bit of wood, seeds shaken in a little container, a hoop, a stick, a string. Such objects could appear in yards where adults were barely holding daily life together. You might think play would vanish in such a place. It did not. Children still found it, because childhood keeps trying to exist even where the world behaves badly. Women encouraged that play when possible, not because they forgot reality, but because they knew children needed moments of being children. As evening edges closer, tired children become heavy with sleep before sleep is available. Heads droop against shoulders. Babies go limp with milk and heat. A woman shifts from one arm to the other and winces because her muscles are already overused. Another calls sharply to a boy climbing where he should not. Another wipes a nose with the corner of her own garment. Another laughs, briefly and quietly, when a toddler announces some solemn nonsense with complete confidence. Life does not stop being absurd simply because it is hard. The sensory world of care is vivid. The warm, damp weight of an infant against the collarbone. The sweet, sour smell of milk on cloth. The powdery dust on a child's knees. The roughness of small braids under busy fingers. The heat of fever in a tiny forehead. The soft snore of a child who fell asleep mid-complaint. These details are easy for history to lose and impossible for mothers to miss. What life was really like for black women on sugar plantations cannot be understood without this constant layering of care onto forced labour. Women were workers in the fields, kitchens, yards, and works. But they were also the ones who carried children through sickness, hunger, and fear. They steadied new mothers after birth. They made room for babies in overcrowded huts. They hid tenderness inside hurried routines. They built family under conditions designed to break it. And perhaps that is the deepest truth here. Motherhood under bondage was not only sorrow, though sorrow was abundant. It was also endurance with a face, memory with hands, and hope stripped down to practical form. A spoon lifted to a child's mouth, a song hummed while pounding grain, a warning whispered, a tear wiped quickly away, a body made tired by work still making itself available for comfort. The plantation wanted labour from black women. It got that, but it could not stop them from pouring care into one another and into the children whose lives, however fragile, still asked to be loved. By dusk, The plantation begins to loosen at the edges, though only a little. The worst glare has faded from the cane, and the sky softens into bronze, violet, and a faint dusty pink over the roofs. Smoke rises from the huts in slow, grey ribbons. The sounds change too. Day labour thins into evening labour. Hoes and baskets are set down. Pots are lifted. Children call out, then are hushed. Somewhere a baby starts crying with great conviction, as if determined to file a formal complaint against the entire estate. Fair enough, really. You return toward the quarters with the others, feet sore, shoulders tight, stomach already thinking ahead. This walk back is not freedom. It is simply the plantation rearranging its demands. Field labour may be easing, but another shift is beginning in the huts and yards, and black women carry much of it. Supper must be made, water must be fetched, clothes must be rinsed or mended, children must be washed, checked, fed, settled, or scolded away from danger. Older people may need food softened or wounds looked at. Tools must sometimes be cleaned. Tomorrow must somehow be prepared inside the remains of today. The huts stand close enough for voices to carry from one doorway to the next. They are built for economy, not comfort. Wattle and daub in some places, wood in others, patched roofs, dirt floors, little ventilation, little privacy. Still, people make lives inside them. That is one of the most striking truths of plantation quarters. A structure meant as shelter for labour becomes, through sheer human stubbornness, a home of sorts. Not an easy home, not a secure one, but a place where someone remembers which corner stays driest in rain, which peg holds the cooking pot, which child sleeps by the wall, which bundle contains the good cloth saved for special use. As you enter the yard, the ground feels cooler than it did at noon. Dust still clings to your ankles. The smell here is layered and familiar. Wood smoke, boiled starch, damp cloth, sweat drying in evening air, a little manure from the paths, a little sweetness drifting from the works, a little rot from the trash heaps. It is not a pretty blend, but it is honest. Plantation life is rarely fragrant in the elegant sense. It has the smell of survival put to work. Women move quickly through the half-light. One is crouched over a pot, stirring with a long spoon, firelight flashing on her forearms. Another is squatting by a basin, rubbing at cloth with tired hands. Another is cutting something small and green on a board balanced across her knees. Another is trying to plait a child's hair while the child wriggles like a determined eel. Evening in the quarters is full of practical choreography. The body may be exhausted, but tasks still find it. This part of the day rarely appears properly in plantation records. Ledgers count labour hours, rations issued, births, deaths, punishments, tools, livestock, barrels. They are much worse at counting unpaid labour done after the counted labour ends. Yet for black women, evening work was essential. They did not step out of one labour system and into leisure. They moved from the plantation's direct demands into the domestic demands that kept families and communities functioning within it. You bend near the fire and feel the dry heat on your shins. Sparks snap upward and vanish. The pot gives off steam scented with cassava, meal, beans, plantain, yam, salt fish, or whatever can be assembled. Every estate, island and region had its own variations, but the general problem remained the same. How do you turn too little into enough for several people? Women knew hundreds of answers. Soak this, mash that, roast these skins, add pepper, stretch the broth, save the better piece for the elder. Give the child the softest part. Eat last if you must. Cooking here is not decorative. It is a form of management, care, and quiet ingenuity. The conversation around the fires rises and falls in low currents. People are tired, so no one wastes speech, yet silence never fully settles. You hear short reports from the day. Someone twisted an ankle. Someone saw a cart come from another estate. Someone says the driver was in a foul mood before breakfast and stayed that way, which surprises absolutely nobody. A woman complains that her cooking pot has developed a crack at the worst possible moment. Another replies that the pot has simply become temperamental from overwork. like the rest of the yard. A few tired laughs travel outward. Even now, humour survives. That humour matters more than it may seem. It releases tension without drawing too much notice. It confirms shared understanding. It reminds people that they still possess judgment, wit, and personality beyond the plantation's use for them. A sharp remark muttered over a cooking fire can restore a bit of dignity to the evening. Sometimes sarcasm is not rebellion exactly, it is medicine. Children fill the spaces between adults. They dart around the edges of the yards, bare feet slapping dust, then droop suddenly with tiredness and lean against anyone available. Older girls often carry responsibilities that would seem heavy anywhere, and especially heavy here. They rock babies while stirring pots. They fetch water with practiced balance. They calm younger siblings. They learn what their mothers know, not because childhood is over, but because childhood is forced to share a room with labour. You take a cup or bowl in hand and walk to the water source. The trip itself is work. The vessel bumps against your thigh. The path is uneven in fading light. Frogs have begun calling from wet places. Mosquitoes rise in the still air. Somewhere beyond the huts, the cane rustles in long dry whispers. When the water is lifted, its weight settles through your wrist, elbow, shoulder, and spine. That weight is familiar. Black women on plantations carried water so often that the movement must have seemed built into the day like breathing. Some women use the evening to wash clothing at least enough to make the next day bearable. The cloth is beaten, rubbed, wrung, and hung if space allows. Soap, if available, is plain and often harsh. Water cools the hands for a moment. Then the work of rubbing brings the ache back. The sound of a washing has its own rhythm. Slap, squeeze, twist, slap again. Nearby. Another woman sews by firelight or the last daylight, her fingers moving over a torn seam with small, impatient precision. A dress must hold a little longer. A shirt must fit one more season. A child's garment is shortened, widened, patched, inherited. Textiles carried a quiet social story in the quarters. A neat patch showed care. A carefully tied headcloth could mark self-respect. A garment washed clean, even when threadbare, still said something important. Respectability in such circumstances was not about pleasing the plantation. It was about preserving a sense of self in public view. Women often bore the labour of that preservation for themselves and for others. Historians agree that enslaved quarters were places of both hardship and social creation, though they still debate how much autonomy people could maintain there from estate to estate. Some plantations imposed strict curfews and intrusive checks. Others allowed a bit more evening movement so long as dawn labour was not affected. But even where surveillance eased, it never vanished. The quarters were lived in under the shadow of power. That is why the community work done there was so important. It reclaimed a few hours of a meaning from a day structured by control. Near one doorway, a woman is checking another woman's back where the skin has been rubbed raw by cloth and labour. She applies something cool, perhaps fat, perhaps a mash of leaves, perhaps simply water and care. Beside them, a boy sleeps sitting upright until his head tips sideways against the wall. Someone lifts him gently without interrupting the conversation. This is yard life at dusk. Practical tenderness. No speeches, no ceremony. Just hands doing what must be done. Food is shared according to need, affection, obligation, and circumstance. A spoonful passed across a fire. A child fed first. A neighbour handed a taste because her own pot was too thin tonight. Hunger does not make people saintly, but it does make generosity more visible when it appears. In a wealthy household, sharing another helping may mean little. Here, it means a measurable cost. That is precisely why it matters. There are also quarrels. Of course, fatigue sharpens tempers. Too many bodies in too little space can wear patience down to the thread. Someone borrowed without asking. Someone failed to help. A child broke something. A man came back cross. A woman is too tired to tolerate foolishness and says so plainly. These frictions belong to real communities. Plantation life did not turn people into symbols. It left them intensely human, with kindness and irritation often living side by side in the same hour. A curious detail from some plantation societies is how important evening hair care could become. Women untangled, Oiled when possible, braided, wrapped, and redid one another's hair after labour. It was grooming, yes, but it was also conversation, comfort, and order restored after the disorder of the day. Fingers moving through hair can calm the nerves, the scalp loosens, stories come out, gossip travels, advice is given. A child who resisted a bath may sit still at last once someone starts parting her hair carefully by the fire. Music sometimes enters the yard as darkness deepens. Not every night, not every place. Fatigue often wins. But sometimes someone sings softly while cooking or mending. Sometimes a group picks up a line and lets it move in a low current through the quarters. Sometimes a hand taps a pot or wall in rhythm. These sounds are modest, but they change the atmosphere. The plantation gives orders in loud tones. The quarters answer in softer ones, creating a different order altogether. You feel the evening air settle cooler on your skin as sweat finally dries. The relief is real, though brief. The fire warms one side of your body while the open night cools the other. Dust has become a fine paste along your ankles. Smoke has lodged itself in your hair and clothes. Your hands smell of food, ash, and iron from the water handle. The body is still tired, but tiredness in the quarters feels different than tiredness in the field. It is still heavy, yet now it is surrounded by familiar voices, by chosen rhythms, by tasks done for your own people, rather than directly under command. An elder begins talking near the doorway of a hut, and even those still moving seem to angle an ear toward her. Elder women often held social authority not granted by the plantation, but recognized within the quarters. They remembered births, deaths, kin ties, remedies, grievances, little scandals, older stories, proper ways of doing certain things. They could settle disputes, shame foolish behaviour, bless a newborn, or simply speak with the calm force of someone who has already survived more than most others can imagine. Their presence gave shape to evening life. A boy drifts too near the fire. He is called back. A baby wakes and fusses. Someone rocks her. A pot is taken off the flames and scraped nearly clean. Two women fold laundry while comparing the merits of different yams with absolute seriousness, as though a great culinary council has convened under moonlight. To be fair, after a day like this, yam quality may indeed feel like a matter of state importance. Ordinary preferences remain meaningful even under bondage. People still like what they like. The quarters after labour were also places where information spread, alliances formed, and decisions took shape. Who will watch the little ones while another woman tends to a sick relative? Who has thread to spare? Who may have access to market goods on a Sunday? Who heard news from the port? Who needs help mending a roof before rain comes again? These conversations built a life beneath the plantation's official one. Without them, daily existence would have become even more precarious. What life was really like for black women on sugar plantations included this second shift at dusk, this dense social labour that held the quarters together. They cooked with worn tools and too little food. They washed, mended, soothed, advised, fed, and organised. They kept children alive long enough to sleep. They created warmth in structures never built for comfort. They built order out of scarcity and community out of constant pressure. Night has come fully now. Firelight flickers against hut walls. Crickets take over where daytime birds have gone quiet. The cane fields beyond the quarters have turned into dark moving shapes under the wind. You sit for a moment at last, bowl empty, muscles humming with fatigue, and listen to the low life of the yard continue around you. This is not rest in the grand sense. It is more intimate than that. It is the fragile evening world black women made with their own hands after the plantation had already taken so much from those same hands all day. When the night deepens and the yard grows quieter, another layer of plantation life begins to show itself. The louder labours have eased. Fires burn lower. Children fall asleep in awkward, trusting positions. The air cools just enough to feel merciful on tired skin. And into that dimness come the things that are harder to count and harder to control. Prayer, memory, healing. The old words murmured softly, the songs half sung, the hands that know which leaf, which root, which wash, which whispered blessing might steady a person through another day. You sit near a doorway where the night breeze can pass over your face. It carries the smell of damp earth, ash, and cane fields breathing in the dark. Crickets pulse in the grass. A night bird calls once and then goes still. Somewhere a pot lid shifts as cooling metal settles. The plantation, so harsh by daylight, becomes more secret at night. Not kinder, just less certain of itself. Darkness hides the edges of power a little, and in that uncertain space, women tend to things no overseer can fully manage. Faith takes many forms here. Some women pray in ways taught by missionaries, repeating Christian phrases, psalms, or hymns learned in chapel, on estates, or from one another. Some blend these with older rhythms, inherited gestures, and spiritual habits carried across generations and oceans. Some do not separate them at all. A Bible story may live beside an older belief in protective signs, ancestral presence, or the moral force of spoken words. Plantation authorities often preferred neat conversions and tidy doctrine. Human belief is rarely that obedient. You hear a woman begin a prayer beside a sleeping child. Her voice is low, almost conversational. She asks for strength, health, mercy, protection, and safe sleep. The words are simple, but the tone carries weight. This is not religion performed for approval. It is private speech offered into a hard world. Another woman listening nearby adds a quiet Amen. The sound is so soft it barely crosses the room, yet it changes the atmosphere at once. The air feels steadier, as if the hut itself has inhaled. Black women on plantations often became guardians of spiritual continuity. They taught children prayers. They kept funeral customs alive as best they could. They interpreted dreams, repeated scripture, held prayer circles, recalled songs, and carried scraps of cosmology that did not fit easily into the categories used by missionaries or planters. In many plantation societies, women were also central to Afro-Atlantic healing traditions, where bodily care, spiritual protection, and communal memory were closely connected. Historians know that enslaved religion in the 19th century was deeply creative and varied, though they still argue over the exact balance between African continuities and New World adaptations in any particular region. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the history, and it is part of the truth. Enslaved people were not preserving old customs unchanged under glass. They were remaking spiritual life under pressure, using what survived, what arrived newly, and what daily suffering demanded. An elder woman sits with a little bundle of leaves in her lap. She crushes them slowly between her fingers, releasing a smell that rises green and bitter in the warm dark. Another woman brings a cup. Another brings water. The mixture is prepared for someone with stomach trouble, or a fever, or a cough that has lingered too long. Herbal knowledge was practical treasure on a plantation. Women knew which leaves cooled skin, which roots helped settle a body, which baths soothed aching muscles, which infusions eased childbirth pains, and which remedies were only worth trying if nothing else remained. This knowledge passed through conversation, observation, and repetition. A girl watched her mother steep one remedy, her aunt pound another, her grandmother reject a third. That is how an archive survives without paper. The smell of herbs in a hut can be startlingly vivid. Minty, peppery, sharp, earthy, resinous, sour. One leaf smells clean as rain. Another smells like crushed bark and smoke. Another has a sweetness that turns bitter at the edge. These are not fancy remedies presented in polished jars with tidy labels. They are living materials, gathered from provision grounds, paths, wood edges, gullies, or garden corners, then handled by women who know how the plant should feel when it is ready. A small child stirs and coughs in sleep. Someone lifts the child gently and rubs the back in slow circles. That touch matters too. Healing on a plantation is not only what enters the body, it is how the body is held. A cool cloth across the forehead, a hand pressed to the chest, a back rubbed until the breathing steadies. A tired woman sitting up later than she should because someone else needs watching. Care has its own rhythm after dark. Some planters mocked or feared black healing traditions. They dismissed them as superstition when they could not understand them, then relied on them when estate medicine failed. That contradiction is familiar. Systems built on domination often sneer at the knowledge they secretly need. The plantation doctor might appear for major illness, accidents, or epidemic fear, but daily survival often depended on the women in the quarters. They knew whose fever was ordinary and whose was dangerous. They knew which child was merely fussy and which had gone frighteningly quiet. They knew when a new mother needed broth, when an old woman needed her feet soaked, when a rash meant heat, and when it meant something worse. You hear singing from farther down the row of huts. Not loud, just enough to travel. The melody moves slowly, with the soft rise and fall of a cradle motion. A few voices join, then separate again. Song at night can be prayer, comfort, memory, or all three. It can quiet children. It can settle adults. It can make one crowded room feel part of a larger human circle. No overseer writes that down in a ledger. Yet without such moments, plantation life would have been even more crushing than it already was. Memory also lives strongest at night. In the day, work drives thought into short practical lanes. Lift this, carry that, watch him, stir now. By night the mind has room, and room can be painful. Women remember mothers, sisters, rivers, markets, villages, churches, coastlines, cooking methods, songs, names, sayings, and stories. Some memories come from Africa directly. Some come through parents and grandparents who carried those worlds in their speech. Some belong to the island or colony itself, built from local experience and plantation generations. Identity is layered here. It is not pure, but it is not empty either. One woman recalls a way of seasoning fish her mother swore by. Another repeats a proverb that makes the others laugh because it applies perfectly to an especially foolish white man. Another tells a child about a place with trees so large that shade felt like a whole second sky. Such recollections are not merely nostalgic decoration. They keep alive a sense that the plantation is not the only frame for reality. There were other places, other rules, other ways of being a woman in the world. A curious detail from some Caribbean accounts is the importance of protective objects and gestures. A string tied a certain way, a shell tucked near a sleeping place, a bit of cloth wrapped around something meaningful, a prayer spoken over a threshold. Scholars are careful here, rightly so, because outsiders often misunderstood what they saw and called everything mysterious. Still, it is clear that many enslaved people used protective practices that joined spiritual belief, emotional reassurance, and community tradition. Protection is never trivial where danger is ordinary. You lean against the hut wall and feel the packed surface warm where it has held the day's heat. Nearby, someone is plaiting hair by touch more than sight, fingers moving with astonishing confidence in the dark. Hair care at night becomes almost ceremonial in its calm. Part, braid, twist, wrap. The scalp relaxes. The conversation drifts. A child half asleep complains once, then gives in. The simple act of tending hair can become a moment of restoration, a way to reassemble the self after a day spent being used. Women also made meaning through burial and mourning customs, whenever death came, which it did too often. The plantation wanted death handled efficiently. Communities wanted it marked properly, or as properly as possible. Prayers, songs, washing the body, watching, gathering, speaking the name. These acts gave dignity where the system offered very little. Black women often led or shaped these rituals. They understood that memory needed structure, especially in a place designed to erase people quickly. The scholarly uncertainty around mourning practices is considerable, because records are patchy and often filtered through hostile observers. Yet enough survives to show a rich range of funeral and memorial customs in enslaved communities. Christian forms mixed with older beliefs about spirit, kin, return, and proper leave-taking. Women held much of that knowledge. They knew what should be sung, what should be said, what should be placed, what should be remembered. The dead were not only losses, they were also witnesses. The plantation night has its own physical texture. Air dampens the skin. Mosquitoes whine in maddening little loops. The packed dirt floor feels cool under bare feet. A child's sleeping arm is heavy across your lap. The smoke from the evening fire lingers in your hair and cloth. Outside, cane leaves rub together with a dry, silky sound that can seem peaceful until you remember how much labour they contain by day. Even in rest, the plantation clings to the senses. Women answer by filling that sensory world with their own materials: herbs, oil, song, prayer, spoken memory, gentle touch. Some women may have served as spiritual specialists within their communities, though categories blur. A healer may also be a midwife. A praying woman may also prepare herbal baths. An older aunt may interpret a dream in the morning and scold a lazy nephew by noon. Plantation life did not permit tidy professions. It produced women whose authority was earned through usefulness, steadiness, and reputation. Others sought them out because they had learned which people brought calm into troubled rooms. Children absorbed these worlds closely. They watched how prayers were said over the sick. They noticed which songs belonged to sleep and which belonged to sorrow. They learned not to waste certain herbs. They learned which elder women should be listened to the first time. Spiritual inheritance happened through proximity. A child sitting silently by a doorway could receive more than any formal lesson might convey. One of the most moving truths about these nighttime practices is how little they required in material terms and how much they offered in return. A few leaves, a remembered tune, a hand on a forehead, a spoken blessing, a scrap of scripture, a proverb, a braid, a story told low in the dark. None of these could change the structure of slavery by themselves, yet they could strengthen the people trapped within it. They could preserve identity, lower fear, carry memory, and make suffering feel less lonely. What life was really like for black women on sugar plantations included this difficult, beautiful labour of keeping souls intact. They did not only feed bodies and complete tasks, they nurtured belief, interpreted illness, guarded memory, and made small sacred spaces inside crowded huts and smoky yards. They took fragments from many worlds and stitched them into something living enough to hold a community together. Now the night settles more fully, the singing has faded, the herbs have been put aside, a final prayer has been whispered over a sleeping child, the breeze moves lightly through the cane and brushes the doorway. In the dim hut, faces blur into shadow, but the atmosphere remains full of quiet intention. Here, in the low hours after the plantation's visible business is done, black women continue their most hidden work. They keep watch, they keep memory, they keep faith, and in doing so, they keep alive a realm of meaning the plantation can never fully enter. Night never removes fear from the plantation. It only changes its shape. In daylight, fear walks openly with orders, tools, and horses. After dark, it settles into the quieter corners of the body. It waits in the pause after a footstep outside the hut. It stirs when voices rise near the yard. It lives in memory, in rumour, in the knowledge that punishment can come suddenly and still feel completely ordinary to those who command it. For black women on sugar plantations, fear is not a passing emotion. It is part of the weather of life. You lie still for a moment and listen. The night carries sounds clearly. Crickets pulse in the grass. Someone coughs from a neighbouring hut. A baby whimpers, then settles. From farther off comes the dull clink of metal from the works, where some task has not fully ended. And then another sound. Boots on packed earth, not running, not stumbling. Measured, intentional. The whole yard seems to notice without speaking. Bodies become alert, even in stillness. Punishment on plantations was meant to do more than hurt. It was meant to instruct, it warned, displayed power, reinforced hierarchy, and reminded everyone that the boundaries of suffering were set by others. This is one reason discipline was often public. A beating in the yard, confinement, chains, extra labour, withholding of food, humiliating exposure. All of these could serve as lessons aimed at more than one person. A plantation rarely wastes cruelty on a single audience when it can terrify 20 at once. Women were fully vulnerable to this world of punishment, though the forms could differ depending on region, owner, and circumstance. Field offences, domestic mistakes, suspected insolence, absence, slow labour, theft of food, resistance, arguments. pregnancy outside approved expectations, refusal, and countless other acts could bring discipline. The plantation often described such punishments as correction, a word so mild it nearly mocks the pain beneath it. That mildness was part of the lie. You remember how the yard feels when punishment is expected. Speech shortens, children are pulled closer, eyes lower, though attention sharpens. The air itself seems to tense. Even the firelight looks nervous. Fear becomes communal in those moments, not because everyone experiences it identically, but because everyone knows the script, who might be called forward, who must stand still, who dares not react visibly, who will comfort later, in the hut. When the crowd is gone and the official lesson is considered complete, a woman may face punishment not only for her own actions, but for those of her children, her kin, or the people she is accused of assisting. That is one of slavery's ugliest tricks. It spreads liability through affection. Care becomes dangerous because anyone you help might draw danger back toward you. Yet women still helped. They still hid food, covered for weakness, passed warnings, nursed the sick, protected children, and kept secrets. Fear did not erase care. It made care more costly. There were also punishments harder to document because they took place in private or semi-private spaces. Women working in the house could endure constant verbal degradation, threats, surveillance, and sexual coercion that did not always appear in formal plantation records. A public whipping leaves a mark that can be seen and described. A closed door, a hand at the wrong moment, a threat spoken quietly in a pantry. These often vanish into silence unless someone later names them. Historians know such violence was widespread, though the archive is painfully uneven because women's testimony was so often suppressed, ignored, or filtered through hostile ears. That uncertainty matters. Scholars still debate the scale and exact forms of gendered punishment on particular estates, because surviving documents were written mostly by those in power. When a manager noted disorder, he might omit the violence that produced it. When a planter praised discipline, he rarely described what discipline looked like from the body receiving it. When silence appears in the archive, it does not mean safety. Often it means concealment. You sit by the low doorway and watch a woman across the yard keep her face still while a white man speaks sharply at her. The whole exchange may last less than a minute, yet in that minute she must manage a whole interior storm. Humiliation, anger, caution, calculation. How low to keep the eyes, whether silence will offend more than speech, whether apology will satisfy or invite more contempt, whether anyone nearby can safely intervene. A sugar plantation demands emotional discipline from the oppressed, while granting emotional indulgence to the powerful. One side must constantly control expression. The other may display temper as a privilege. Children absorb fear with terrible speed. They learn which voices mean danger. They recognize the sound of certain footsteps. They go quiet when adults go quiet. They understand, long before anyone wishes they did, that some areas of the estate are risky. Some moments require invisibility, and some people must be approached with extreme care. A child may not know the full system, but the body learns before language catches up. Shoulders tighten, breath shortens, the stomach drops. Fear becomes muscle memory, yet the plantation never fully owns the emotional world of those within it. Women developed ways of surviving fear that did not depend on denying it. Some prayed through it, some joked after it, some went silent and busy, putting hands to useful work until the body settled. Some sought out other women and sat close without much speech. Some used herbal baths, cool cloths, or rhythmic tasks to calm a frightened child or themselves. Fear was managed socially as much as individually. There is a strange detail in some descriptions of plantation discipline. Owners sometimes complained that those punished did not seem properly remorseful. They looked sullen, stubborn, or strangely composed. Think about what that reveals. The powerful wanted pain, and also wanted a performance of inner surrender. Anything less felt like incomplete victory. A woman who cried too little, spoke too steadily, or met suffering with cold silence could disturb authority more than one who openly collapsed. That is because composure suggests a surviving self. You hear older women sometimes advising younger ones after a confrontation. Do not answer quickly. Do not let him pull you into argument. Keep the child behind you. Save your strength for the hut. Wash the wound before sleep. Say nothing while they're watching. These are techniques of endurance, passed in low tones. Survival on a plantation required knowledge not just of work, but of punishment. How to anticipate it, how to reduce risk, how to recover afterward, how to read when danger was only anger and when anger had sharpened into something worse. The body keeps score in many ways, and not only bruises or visible scars, though those existed. There is also the ache in the gut when voices rise unexpectedly, the flinch when a hand moves too quickly, the sleeplessness after a public humiliation, the heaviness that follows hours of dread even when no blow lands. Fear exhausts. It consumes strength that might otherwise go to labour, care, or rest. The plantation counted stolen labour carefully. It did not count the energy stolen by terror. Though terror was one of its regular tools, women found ways to restore one another afterward. A cool compress, food saved from the pot, a child distracted so the mother could breathe, a story told to shift the mood of the room, a song low enough not to draw notice. The simple act of sitting together in silence could be a remedy. Shared presence says what words cannot always manage. You are not alone in what happened. We saw. We know. We remain here. There were also larger fears tied to the wider system. Sale, transfer, the death of an owner, the arrival of a new manager, illness spreading through the huts, crop failure leading to harsher discipline, political rumours about rebellion or emancipation followed by tighter control. Fear was not only personal and immediate, it could be historical, structural, looming. A woman might be cooking supper and also worrying that her child could be sold within the year, that the driver's temper is worsening, that the fever in the next hut will reach her own family by morning. Daily life ran on layers of anxiety. The plantation also used uncertainty deliberately. Rules might be enforced harshly one week and ignored the next. A privilege might be granted, then withdrawn. A small kindness might mask a future demand. This instability prevented people from settling into confidence. It encouraged constant vigilance, and vigilance, while protective, is tiring beyond words. Imagine never fully unclenching inside your own life. A few women surely chose open confrontation at times, whether through sharp speech, refusal, escape attempts, or other actions. Such moments mattered, but they came with severe risk. More often, survival required a complicated balance between caution and dignity. Too much compliance could break the spirit. Too much visible resistance could bring disaster. Women walked this line daily, often while carrying children, feeding others, and performing labour that left little room for mistakes. One of the quieter terrors for women was sexual vulnerability. This part of plantation life cannot be told honestly without naming it, even gently. Women could be targeted by owners, overseers, drivers, or other men whose power over them was direct or indirect. The threat might be explicit, implied, habitual, or woven into employment near the house. It shaped where women stood, how they moved, whom they trusted, when they avoided being alone, and how communities tried, within limited means, to shield the vulnerable. The archive rarely captures the full scale of this violence, but its shadow lies across nearly every history of enslaved women in the Americas. And still, fear did not erase judgment. Women continued to assess character with remarkable clarity. They knew who was impulsive, who was vain, who could be soothed, who should never be trusted, who might respond to tears, who to silence, who to apparent cheerfulness, who to a carefully staged misunderstanding. These were not minor social skills. They were life-preserving intelligence. Late at night, when the yard has gone nearly still, fear sometimes returns as memory. The body finally has a moment to stop moving, and then the mind replays what daylight pushed aside. A threat, a cry from the yard, the expression on another woman's face while punishment was given, the way a child trembled afterward, the way your own hand shook once no one could see. Sleep comes unevenly when fear has been the day's companion. Black women often had to be the steady ones anyway. A child wakes frightened, an elder needs water, A sister is weeping quietly. Someone must tend the fire. Someone must rise at the next bell. Survival demands composure from the same people, most denied protection. That is one of the bitterest patterns in plantation life. Those carrying the heaviest emotional weight are the ones expected to keep everyone else from falling apart. What life was really like for black women on sugar plantations included this constant negotiation with fear. Not fear as drama, but fear as routine. Public punishment meant to humiliate. Private threat meant to isolate. Discipline used as theatre. Uncertainty used as a weapon. Children learning anxiety through atmosphere. Women restoring one another in hidden ways after visible harm. This was part of the daily fabric stitched into labour, motherhood, evening life, and sleep itself. And yet fear was never the whole story. The plantation wanted fear to define the soul as well as the schedule. It did not fully succeed. Women remained observant, strategic, loving, angry, prayerful, funny, and fiercely attentive to one another even under threat. That may be why the system worked so hard to punish. It sensed correctly that beneath the lowered eyes and measured voices there persisted a deeper life that discipline could wound but not completely master. Sunday, when it comes at all in anything like recognizable form, does not arrive as pure rest. That would be too generous for plantation life. Instead, it opens a narrow door. The labour schedule shifts slightly. The bells may sound differently. The field may release its grip for a few hours, or for part of the day, depending on the estate, the season, and the mood of those in charge. Into that small opening pour 100 human needs at once. Washing, cooking, visiting, selling, praying, mending, breathing, choosing, if only in tiny ways. And for black women, those little choices can feel almost luxurious simply because so few are usually available. Morning light on a Sunday looks much like any other morning light over the cane. The same dew rests on the leaves, the same smoke rises from the works, the same huts stand in their rows. Yet the atmosphere has shifted. Bodies move with a slightly altered rhythm. A few women take more time with a head wrap. A child is scrubbed more thoroughly than on work mornings. Someone shakes out a dress and smooths it carefully at the seams. It is not vanity, it is presentation. A rare chance to appear before others in a way chosen, however modestly, by yourself. On some plantations, Sunday allowed attendance at market or chapel. On others, it was swallowed by provision ground labour, repair work, or restricted movement. Much depended on local custom and plantation policy. But across many parts of the sugar world, enslaved people used Sundays and other limited free moments to build a social and economic life that the plantation did not fully control. Women were central to this. They raised produce, prepared food for sale, traded small goods, visited kin, exchanged news, arranged baptisms or marriages where possible, and used those brief hours to reinforce ties beyond their immediate yard. You step onto the road with a basket balanced against your hip. Inside are a few things that might become coin, credit, or barter. A handful of peppers, some greens, cassava bread, eggs, if luck has been kind, perhaps a little starch cake, perhaps a cloth item mended neatly enough to exchange. Nothing extravagant. But then, the entire Sunday economy of enslaved people often rested on the art of making significance from very little. The road feels different when you walk it for your own purpose, even if that purpose exists only by permission. Dust lifts underfoot. The air smells of sun-warmed cane and damp earth drying after dawn. Birds fuss in the hedges. Other people join the road from neighbouring huts, neighbouring estates, neighbouring tracks. Women with baskets, men carrying produce, children trotting alongside or dozing against shoulders. There is conversation now, more open than on work mornings. Not loud, not careless, but fuller. News travels quickly along such roads. Markets mattered because they offered something rare in plantation life. Choice, however limited. You might decide which bundle to sell first, which pepper to keep, whether to trade for fish, cloth, tobacco, salt, thread, or a little extra food. The sums were small, the freedom fragile, the surveillance never far away. Yet the difference between being ordered and choosing is immense. A free person may barely notice it. An enslaved woman notices every inch of it. Black women often dominated these small market spaces in plantation societies. They knew how to bargain, how to stretch stock, how to read buyers, how to save a better item for a better exchange, how to turn produce from provision grounds into a tiny reserve against future hunger. Their economic skill rarely appears grand in official accounts, but it was indispensable. A little extra fish, a little cloth, a little oil, a little salt. These could alter the quality of daily life more than an outsider might guess. Historians agree on the importance of these informal and semi-formal markets, though they still argue over how much genuine autonomy they offered. Were they spaces of limited economic independence, or merely extensions of plantation exploitation, where enslaved people laboured on their own time to supplement inadequate rations? The answer, frustratingly, but truthfully, is both. Sunday trade could be empowering and burdensome at once. It created opportunity precisely because the plantation failed to provide enough. You reach the market space, whether it is a roadside cluster, a town edge, a churchyard spillover, or a more established square. The place is alive in a way the plantation yard never is. Smells meet you all at once: dried fish, fresh herbs, sweat, dust, roasted plantain, salt, fruit beginning to turn in the heat, smoke from little cooking fires. Voices overlap in quick exchanges. Fabric flashes in bits of colour. Someone laughs loudly. Someone argues over price with theatrical outrage that fools absolutely no one. A child tries to sneak a taste and gets caught. The whole scene hums with human intention rather than imposed labour. You set down your basket and arrange its contents with care. Presentation matters. The peppers look brighter if placed together. The greens seem fresher if shaken once and spread wide. A woman beside you has done the same with her cassava cakes, stacking them neatly. Another has a few limes and 2 precious lengths of thread. Another is selling cooked food, and the smell alone draws people near. Competition and solidarity live side by side here. You may bargain hard with one another and still share news, warnings, or laughter in the next breath. A quirky detail from plantation market life is how often women became known for one particular specialty. One makes the best pepper sauce. One has especially good yams. One is clever with cakes. One somehow always has thread when nobody else does. Reputation mattered in tiny economies. A good name was capital. You could not afford sloppiness if you hoped people would seek out your basket next time. Markets also brought contact. A sister from another estate. A mother separated by distance but not impossibly so. A man carrying news from the port. A free black woman with sharper clothes and quicker eyes, moving through the crowd with the practiced self-possession of someone who knows both danger and advantage. These meetings could be joyous, awkward, painful, hopeful. Family ties stretched across plantations whenever people could sustain them, and Sundays were often the thin threads that kept those ties from snapping entirely. You see one woman touch another's arm and then simply stand still, smiling in exhausted disbelief. No dramatic embrace. Just the shock of recognition after too long apart. They begin talking at once, voices low and urgent. How is your child? Is your mother living? Did they sell him? Have you heard from your sister? Did the fever pass? Such conversations hold whole worlds in a few minutes. The market is not only economic space, it is emotional geography. Religion may be part of the day as well. Some women go to chapel or church, willingly, skeptically, dutifully, or with mixed feelings shaped by experience. Missionaries sometimes offered genuine spiritual comfort, literacy, or limited advocacy. They also sometimes preached obedience in ways convenient to plantation power. Enslaved women listened with intelligence. They could take what nourished and distrust what did not. A sermon about deliverance may land differently when heard by people denied their own time, labour, and children. Scripture rarely remains tame in such ears. Some Sundays also allowed visiting burial grounds, attending baptisms, weddings, or communal gatherings. Clothing is adjusted for these occasions with immense care. a head wrap folded just right, a dress washed and dried, a child's face polished with water until it shines. These acts of preparation are about dignity as much as appearance. They say that some moments deserve ceremony even in a world arranged against your joy. Yet even in these narrower spaces of choice, the plantation remains present. A pass may be required, a curfew approaches, the wrong white observer may interpret any gathering as threat. Money earned may be noticed and resented. Too much cheerfulness can attract suspicion. Too much movement can be punished. Fragile freedom is still fragile. It trembles because it depends on structures that can close the door at any time. Women navigate this fragility with care. They keep an eye on the hour while bargaining. They remember what must still be cooked tonight. They calculate how much to spend and how much to hide. They watch children in the crowd. They listen for news that might affect the week ahead. A sale by one planter, a death in a household, a rumour from town. Political shifts far above them can filter down as changed rules on the estate by Monday. Market women often become excellent political readers, not because anyone grants them office, but because survival demands interpretation. One of the sweetest parts of the day may be utterly ordinary. Tasting a thing by preference rather than necessity. Choosing a fruit because you want it, not because it is all that exists. Buying a ribbon, perhaps, or a comb, or a pinch of seasoning to make the next pot feel less dull. These are small decisions. But small decisions accumulate into personhood. Choice tells you that your own liking still matters. Children feel the difference too. They look around more brightly. They tug at skirts. They stare at goods. They meet cousins. They beg for a treat. They receive either a stern refusal or, on very lucky days, a tiny indulgence, a little cake, a bite of fruit, a shell trinket. Their joy can be painful to watch because it is so brief and so easily bounded. Still, adults try to grant it when they can. A childhood made almost entirely of work and caution needs some memory of delight. As the sun lowers, the market thins. Goods are gathered, trades counted, unsold items repacked. People begin taking the road back with the same baskets now filled differently. Salt instead of peppers, cloth instead of eggs, news instead of uncertainty. The evening light catches dust in gold clouds around moving feet. Conversation becomes quieter again, more thoughtful. The return always carries a little sadness, because the road leads back to the same estate, the same bell, the same labour. Yet it also carries the residue of having inhabited, for a few hours, a more self-directed world. Provision grounds may still demand attention before dark. Women check on planted food, pull weeds, gather leaves, inspect roots, and judge what might be ready soon. This work is technically for their own households, but it comes on top of everything else. Freedom on a plantation is often spelled extra labour. Still, food raised by your own effort and distributed by your own decision carries a different meaning from a ration handed down by management. Ownership, however partial, changes the feeling of work. The scholarly debate over Sunday life often circles this exact tension. Were these hours a safety valve built into slavery, preventing revolt by allowing limited autonomy, or were they genuinely generative spaces where enslaved communities built culture, economy, and kinship with remarkable creativity? Again, both truths sit together. Plantation power benefited from shifting subsistence burdens onto the enslaved. Enslaved women used the same space to create networks and meaning beyond plantation intent. By the time you reach the quarters again, twilight is deepening. The basket handle has left a sore impression in your palm. Your feet ache from roads rather than rows, which feels strangely preferable. The smells of the day cling to you: market dust, fruit peel, fish, cloth, cane wind, smoke waiting at the huts. Around you, people are more animated than on ordinary evenings, carrying talk back into the yard. Someone heard a rumour of legal change. Someone saw a relative. Someone bought salt. Someone did badly in trade and is cross about it. Someone did well and pretends not to be pleased while clearly being very pleased indeed. What life was really like for black women on sugar plantations included these narrow but precious spaces where choice could briefly reappear. They sold and bartered not as charming side activity, but as serious economic labour. They maintained kin ties across distance. They dressed with dignity. They sought worship, news, ingredients, remedies, and company. They managed the dangerous balance between permission and self-direction with great skill. Sunday did not make the plantation kind. It did something subtler and perhaps more important. It revealed, for a few hours, the world black women kept building underneath the plantation's control, a world of trade, taste, family, memory, style, judgment, and motion chosen for their own reasons. Thin freedom, yes, easily broken, closely watched, but real enough to be felt in the body, like a different kind of air on the road, and real enough to remind the heart that another life remained imaginable. Night on the plantation is never fully empty. Even when the yard's quiet and the huts settle into uneven sleep, the future keeps moving through people's minds. You feel it in the hush after the last conversation fades. You hear it in a breath drawn slowly before sleep. You sense it in the way someone stares out toward the dark cane and does not immediately turn back inside. Dreams here are not always soft things. Sometimes they are plans. Sometimes they are memories dressed as plans. Sometimes they are only a stubborn refusal to believe that this exact life is all the world can ever offer. You sit near the doorway while the night air shifts against your face. The ground still holds some warmth from the day, though the breeze above it is cooler now. Cane leaves rub together in the distance with a dry whispering sound, like skirts brushing through a corridor. Crickets work steadily. A child turns in sleep behind you and lets out a little sigh. The estate is quieter than it was, but not peaceful. Peace implies safety. What you have instead is a pocket of lowered noise in which thoughts can grow larger. Black women on sugar plantations imagined futures in many ways. Some dreamed of flight, whether alone, with children, or with kin. Some hoped for sail to a less brutal place, which is a heartbreaking kind of hope. But history is full of people forced to choose between horrors by degree. Some imagined manumission through a promise, a purchase, a death in the white family, a legal shift, a rumour becoming fact. Some placed their hope in children, some in God, some in rebellion, some in the simple determination to outlast those who believed they owned them. Hope did not come in one official shape. You hear women speaking softly outside one of the huts. Their tones are low and measured, not because the hour is sacred, though it is in its way, but because sound travels and caution is habit. Someone mentions a woman on another estate who may have gotten word to family farther inland. Someone else has heard that a sailor in town spoke of change in distant places. Another snorts very gently at rumour, having seen too many rumours collapse by breakfast. Skepticism is common here. Dreams must live beside realism, not in place of it. That realism is earned. By 1835, the world around the plantation is not static. Emancipation debates, legal changes, rebellions, and imperial politics are shaping different parts of the Atlantic in uneven ways. Enslaved people knew more about these shifts than planters like to admit. News moved through ports, markets, sailors, free black communities, servants, literate intermediaries, and travelling workers. Not every rumour was true. Many were distorted, yet rumour itself mattered, because it proved the plantation was not the whole world. Something was happening elsewhere. Laws could change, regimes could crack, masters could become frightened. Historians still debate how specific and accurate such political knowledge was among enslaved communities in particular places, because rumour leaves a tricky record. But there is no serious doubt that black women participated in these networks of listening, interpreting, and retelling. They heard things at markets, in house service, near roads, through kin, through chapel, through commerce. They weighed one story against another. They judged which bits sounded foolish and which sounded possible. This was political intelligence, even when carried in whispers over a cooking fire. Escape remained one possible horizon, though it was a dangerous one. For women, the risks were especially tangled. Flight alone might offer speed, but leaving children behind could be unbearable. Taking children meant slower movement, greater visibility, more need for food and shelter. A woman might know routes into woods, mountains, marshes, or towns where runaways sometimes hid. she might also know exactly how quickly punishment would follow failure. To dream of escape was not simple fantasy. It required maps of danger running beneath every thought. You imagine the road beyond the estate in moonlight, white dust, dark hedges, a ditch shining faintly, frogs in the wet ground, branches crowding the edges. Somewhere beyond that, another road, another plantation, perhaps a market town, a fishing place, a camp in the hills, a free settlement, a sympathetic household, or perhaps only more uncertainty. The geography of hope is never tidy. It is drawn partly from real paths, partly from hearsay, partly from the heart's refusal to stay inside fences forever. A curious little detail appears in some accounts of enslaved communities. People sometimes stored tiny useful items for imagined futures. A bit of cloth, a needle, a knife if one could be hidden, a coin, a charm, a scrap of food set aside. Such objects might serve daily needs, of course. But they could also become the contents of possibility, the material grammar of maybe. Hope often lives in pockets before it lives in speeches. For many women, dreams beyond the cane were not only about dramatic escape. They were about dignity made ordinary, sleeping without listening for orders, feeding children first because love says so, not because the bell briefly permits it, cooking without measuring every grain against scarcity, choosing where to walk, wearing a dress because it pleases you, sitting in shade when tired, speaking without calculating who is near enough to punish the wrong tone. Freedom is often described in heroic language, but for people denied the basics, it can sound wonderfully domestic. You hear one woman describe, almost under her breath, what she would do if she had a little ground of her own, more plantain, a lime tree, a better roofline so rain would run off cleanly, chickens kept where the dogs could not reach, a larger pot. The thought is so practical it almost hides its radical force. To plan your own household in your own terms is a direct contradiction of plantation logic. The plantation says your labour belongs elsewhere. Her imagined garden says otherwise. Others dream through children, a daughter who might grow without the constant field call, a son who might choose his own work, a child taught to read, a child baptized freely, a child sleeping in one place long enough to know it as home. Mothers know such hopes are dangerous because affection gives pain a place to land. Yet they hope anyway. To refuse hope altogether would be another kind of death. And black women on plantations were engaged in the daily business of keeping life alive in every sense available. There were also dreams shaped by collective action, rebellion, slowdown, poisonings rumoured or real, coordinated absences, meetings held in secrecy, alliances across estates, protective ties with maroon communities in some regions. Women were not always visible in the official narratives of resistance, but invisibility in official records is not the same as absence in reality. Women carried messages, hid supplies, interpreted danger, fed those in motion, and decided whether children could be moved or concealed. Revolt is not only the moment of the weapon, it is also the web of preparation and support around it. The night invites dangerous honesty. A woman who laughs through the day may admit fear now. Another who seemed hard as wood by the boiling house may reveal a longing so tender it almost hurts to hear. You realize how often the plantation confuses silence with emptiness. It sees women working, obeying, carrying, nursing, cooking, bending, and straightening. It does not hear the full inward life moving beneath those actions. At night that inward life becomes audible, at least to one another. A little girl, not yet asleep, asks a question about the stars. An older woman points through the doorway. The stars are sharp tonight, scattered with almost insulting calm above the huts. The cane, the works, the whole machinery of sugar. For a moment the sky seems too large to belong over such a place. Perhaps that is part of its comfort. The stars are a reminder that the plantation is real and also small. Cruel, yes. Powerful, yes. Total, no. There is always a beyond. In some plantation regions, people use stars, coastlines, rivers, and seasonal signs in practical ways, whether for travel, timing, weather, or imagination. Scholars remain cautious about reconstructing specific navigational knowledge in every context, and rightly so. Still, people who worked outdoors constantly knew the natural world intimately. Women knew when rain was building from the smell of the wind. They knew where ground held water, where trees gave better shade, which paths stayed firmer after storms, where herbs grew, where dogs barked first when strangers approached. Such knowledge could support both survival and dreaming. The body, even when full of hope, remains tired. You feel it now in your shoulders, in the back of the neck, in the soles of the feet that throb once stillness arrives. The hut smells of smoke sunk into cloth, sleeping breath, cooled ash, and the faint sweetness of cane drifting from far off. A rough blanket edge grazes your wrist. The darkness is soft where the moon does not reach, and silver where it does. It is in this tired body that dreaming must happen, not in abstraction, in flesh that has worked all day and still insists on imagining more. One woman recalls a story of a place where black people walk free in numbers too large to count. Another says she has heard that laws can change with paper and seals, which sounds unimpressive until you remember how often paper has ruled bodies here. Another trusts only what she can touch. Another trusts God. Another trusts no one in authority but keeps one fierce ember of expectation anyway. The conversation does not resolve. That feels true to life. Hope on a plantation is rarely neat enough to agree with itself. A child begins to stir and mutter. His mother draws him closer without waking fully. Even this motion holds the future inside it. Protect, gather, keep close. Women on sugar plantations were constantly engaged in acts that leaned toward tomorrow even when tomorrow looked hostile. Saving seed, teaching a child, passing on a remedy, hiding a coin, remembering a name, repeating a prayer, telling a story of another place. These are future-making acts, though no plantation ledger would recognize them as capital. One of the most important truths about dreams beyond the cane is that they were not escapist in the shallow sense. They did not replace reality. They helped people endure it, interpret it, and sometimes change it. A woman who imagines another life may work differently, parent differently, save differently, watch differently, and decide differently. Hope is not always soft. Sometimes it sharpens the mind. The night grows later. Conversation thins. The children are asleep at last. Someone coughs once, then is quiet. Outside, the breeze has settled, and the cane now rustles only occasionally. The estate seems to be holding its breath. You lie down on the rough pallet and let your eyes adjust to the dark above. The roofline is barely visible. The future is even less visible than that, and yet it presses close. You cannot see it clearly. You can feel its possibility. What life was really like for black women on sugar plantations included this hard, necessary traffic between despair and imagination. They knew the estate in all its cruelty, knew the limits, the risks, the reach of punishment, the weight of labour. And still they dreamed. Not because they were naive, because they were alive. They imagined roads, papers, ships, gardens, wages, safer berths, unsold children, gentler mornings, chosen husbands, literate daughters, roofs of their own, prayers without fear, meals not measured by rations, and nights in which footsteps outside the door meant nothing at all. Now the body begins to loosen into sleep. The sounds of the plantation recede to a distant hum. The ground supports you, rough but steady. Your breathing slows. Around you, the hut settles into the shared quiet of weary people who have given too much and somehow kept something back. In that remaining inward space, the mind turns toward gentler images. A field that belongs to no master. Water moving slowly under moonlight. A child laughing without being hushed. A cooking fire lit for family alone. A road taken by choice. A morning entered without dread. The images drift and soften. They no longer need to be plans or arguments. They can simply float. You feel the night air cool against your skin and the warmth of sleep gather behind your eyes. The cane beyond the huts becomes only a dark shape, then less than a shape, then almost nothing at all. The bells are silent. The drivers are gone into shadow. The boiling house has lost its hard glare. In their place comes the quieter world that tired minds create for themselves when they must rest. A little house under trees, a wider sky, clean cloth drying in a breeze, hands no longer rushed, voices speaking low and kind, children safe and heavy with sleep, ground that keeps what you plant in it, time that unfolds without command, and as the night deepens, all the sharp edges begin to blur. Smoke fades, heat lifts, the rough floor, the worn cloth, the ache in the shoulders, all of it eases into distance for a while. You drift toward a place where no bell can reach, where the dark is only dark and not a warning, where memory becomes softer and the future no longer needs to be forced into shape. It can arrive slowly, like cool air through a doorway, like the first quiet light before sunrise, like rest finally accepted by a body that has carried enough. So you let the plantation fall away for now, you let the cane hush itself, you let the night hold what the day could not, and in that hush, under stars too wide for any master to own, you sink gently into sleep.